Toni, welcome.
Thank you, Janelle. I'm so happy to be here. For everybody listening, Janelle and I were just, well, no, I was running around this little town in Costa Rica trying to find internet that would work. Turns out harder than it seems. So I look like a lobster just from the past 10 minutes. So you'll have to excuse me.
So this gives me a good question with a quick answer. Toni, what are you struggling with these days?
The heat, honestly, I know it sounds, just awfully privileged and awful to say, but I came to Costa Rica last month to get away from the Canadian winter. And it's been brutal trying to climatize. I was at home for the past 2 years for the first time in 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
where it's nice and cool and crisp, and you don't have to ever worry about heat. You just have to worry about staying warm. So it's much easier to have to put clothes on than have to, you can only take so much clothes off
Yes.
before you're going to get arrested. But other than that, yeah, 10 out of 10.
So for anyone who doesn't know, when Toni and I say home, we mean Newfoundland. People always make fun of me thinking I'm from a fishing village, but it's not me. It's actually Toni from a very fishing village type of place in Newfoundland.
Well, I mean, I guess you're from Grand Falls, which for all your listeners who definitely don't know where that is, it's kind of an anomaly. It's like one of those sort of urban-ish Newfoundland towns, but not exactly a small town, but definitely wouldn't even call it a proper city or town.
No.
Yeah, kind of in between, I suppose.
Whereas where you grew up, how many people did you graduate high school with?
Well, there was 5 of us in total. So you had a lot of options for dating,
Yep.
just plentiful. There was, no fish in the sea when I
Literally.
grew up. Literally none, because we grew up, both you and I, Janelle, grew up in the time after the moratorium, which was devastating for rural Newfoundland. But yeah, speaking figuratively, there was no fish in the sea in the dating pool either growing up with 5 people in your class, including myself. So that was, it was fun. But I knew the big wide world was out there, and I was very, very excited to leave Newfoundland, which was really funny because when I left, really, really ready to come back. Kind of feels like a very common tale.
Yes. And you're going to laugh because I'm a bit of a bad Newfoundlander, but I actually don't know what the moratorium is. And I know what you're doing with your business, but I actually I don't understand the history behind it. So give me a lesson and everyone else.
I will. It's a well rehearsed speech, trust me.
Please, please. I
But
expect it to be.
so the cod fishery off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland was at one point the largest fishery in the entire world. It was sustainable for 500 years, which is a very, very, very long time. And up until the early 90s, in 1992, when the fishery was actually extinct. So Newfoundland is actually the newest province in Canada, besides the territories, of course. But Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949. And less than 50 years later, this fishery that had sustained everybody in Newfoundland, that had brought, the Spaniards over, had brought the Portuguese to come fish, had brought the French and the English and Irish. Pretty much the reason Newfoundland exists in the first place was because of the cod fishery. Less than 50 years after Newfoundland joined Canada, it was completely drove to extinction.
I remember growing up, going cod fishing. There was a limit and I didn't understand why. And I remember hearing from my parents being like, yeah, like before you could just put your bucket down and get a ton of fish. And now it's there's a limit to catching them. So why do you think this this situation where as soon as we join Canada, then our cod fishery is extinct? Why do you think that is?
Well, without getting too political, because I save that for in my tour I do in Conch.
Well, I'm not coming to Conch anytime soon. So let's get political.
Well, you're going to get the tour right now. Well, perfect. My favorite thing to do. In summary, it was obviously a sustainability problem. Canada had no experience managing a fishery that size, but after World War II, England was looking to offload all their offshore assets. So Newfoundland was actually the Dominion of Newfoundland up until 1949, when we joined Canada and became a Canadian province. So prior to that, the English owned us, and we were, especially near where Janelle, where you're from, around Gander. That was a huge, huge base for the war. It was booming international airport. Pretty much every single flight that had to leave America to either go to Europe had to stop in Newfoundland. So we were a very, very prominent piece of, I guess, land capital in terms of U.S. airspace and the Army and the Navy and everything. So, Newfoundland kind of had it all at one point. We still do have it all, but We're a very resource rich province. There's, bountiful mines of iron ore in Labrador and other minerals. We have beautiful forestry. We have the biggest fishery in the world. So pretty much like the whole package deal in the eyes of Canada, who was wanting to pretty much get us for a good deal and good price. So the word that's always been used in our history is that we got shafted, which is a
Did we
great.
choose that word?
We did well. One of our old premiers did, but we definitely did get shafted in terms of joining Canada. There was a lot of promises made in the Confederation era that never did come to fruition. We joined Canada as a in debt country, independent republic, essentially. We were very in debt after the war, trying to make back all the money that we had spent to develop all this infrastructure. Canada was pretty much like, yeah, come join Canada and we'll take care of it all. We'll build a bridge from mainland Canada to Newfoundland. We'll do X, Y, and Z.
Which they never did.
Nothing ever happened. We pretty much got pillaged of all of our resources. And even to this very day, we're still in debt. We're still a have not province. We still don't get a fair share of our resources, although there have been premiers in the past. Danny Williams is one of them who really did fight hard to give us a fair share of our offshore oil, which has been a big, big hot topic over the past 15 years, but it's still happening to this day. It's not an isolated issue. I mean, the federal government does this to lots of provinces in Canada. It's just unfortunate because Newfoundland, as you know, is not really well off compared to the rest of Canada. We're the poorest province in Canada, but we also have the highest per capita GDP, which makes absolutely no sense. We make the most money. Newfoundlanders make more money than everybody else in Canada, but we are bankrupt and $2 billion in debt as a province. So
How does that make any sense?
like any freaking sense, we don't know.
So, Toni, obviously you're super passionate about the province that we come from, and you know a lot more than I do. I've just learned a lot just then, and I will act like I know it all moving forward. But let me ask you this. So both of us, we left Newfoundland as quick as we could. So why did you leave if you love the province so much?
Well, I guess left for the same reasons as you. I left. The original plan was always that I was going to go to Memorial University, which at the time had the lowest tuition in Canada. People from Newfoundland and Labrador gravitate towards St. John's, which is the capital, which is where Memorial University is based, just because it's low tuition rates and it's close to home. I always felt the pull to want to go away, pretty much because I grew up being torn between Alberta and Newfoundland. So my mother was in university at the time. They were very young. My parents were 16 and 20 when they had me. So because there was no work in Outport, Newfoundland at the time, we saw a lot of families. And it was actually the largest layoff in Canadian history next to COVID, which is insane. So we saw so many families have to leave the East Coast and go out west to find work. So I was one of those families, which is funny to watch because when I grew up, my best friend at the time, her family, there was 5 children. Father was a fisherman. Mother was a homemaker. And when the moratorium happened, they were pretty much in poverty, growing up in poverty. Couldn't buy milk to put in the house, kind of poverty. Like it was pretty desolate. So we had the luxury of being able to pack up everything and leave. Being my parents were so young and didn't really have much leave behind. So I grew up between Sylvan Lake, Alberta and between Conch. So we would pretty much spend September to April, like the university term in Alberta, and then we'd pack up and move back to Conch. So I was constantly being dragged from out of one school into another, then coming back home and just loving being home and loving that sense of home and the freedom. I mean, I'm from a town of 120 people. So, there was no curfew. You were allowed pretty much the world was your oyster. You opened the door, drove outside of the house. It wasn't like when you live in the city and you're growing up in a suburb. It's like, okay, come back home at 6 p.m. It was like, come back home when it's dark, or so-and-so is going to see you down the road because everybody's watching everybody all the time.
Seriously, if I don't know where you are, someone in this town knows.
Someone does. So there was definitely a sense of freedom and definitely just a sense of safety being a kid. And I mean, you were completely disconnected from the world. We just got pavement this year, which is massively important. Big for tourism, so I'm very excited about that. But we still don't have cell service in Conch, which is kind of beautiful. It's so nice to go there and be disconnected, and that's kind of the experience that we sell to a lot of city dwellers who feel just completely run ragged by city life and want to go somewhere no one else has been and want to go
in
somewhere.
order to disconnect, you literally have to not have the option.
Exactly. You need to be like, you need no option. I mean, there's Wi-Fi, which is great, but half of our experience next year is completely off grid. You're in a solar powered cabin with, a fireplace and propane. And that's 2 nights of the experience, your first 2 nights. So you actually really get to allow some space for you to connect with your true self. Because if I'm where, and I lived in Melbourne for a couple of years and studied in Halifax, but I find when you're in city environments, it's really, really hard to just find that quiet time to actually disconnect and actually just be with yourself because there's so much influence around you. There's so much happening, get pulled 100 different directions. And I actually listened to your podcast last week about boundaries. And it's like, I found living in a city, I couldn't have boundaries. Whereas I'm home in Conch, it's me time. Like nobody's able to contact me, even if they wanted to. No one's able to reach me. And that's such a beautiful feeling just to be truly immersed in nature. Even being here in Costa Rica right now, it's like, it's gorgeous and beautiful and there's so much nature, but at the same time, there's no real sense of disconnection
Mhm.
because you're on the grid the whole time. So yeah, it's a very beautiful place. But growing up as a teenager, as I'm sure you remember growing up in what Newfoundland was like growing up, I mean, you're young and you know the world's out there and you're just so excited to leave. For me, I really knew the world was out there because I lived out west and going back and forth for so long. We didn't come back to Conch till I was 10. And at that point, I was just happy to be in the one place for a little while. But by the time I was about 14, started just attending different kinds of conferences and things across Canada. I ended up winning a heritage fair, went to BC one summer and then another summer and a winter going to Ottawa for like encounters with Canada and these different youth programs that were super exciting. But at the same time, I saw no interest from anybody else in my school to do anything like this
Preach, girl.
because yeah, I just think the mentality is um even in history class I found it funny like in growing up. I'm not sure if this is like this in Grand Falls, but in Conch when we studied history, we studied Newfoundland history. We didn't study world history or Canadian, like brief Canadian history, but it was just so Newfoundland centric that it was almost like you're in a snow globe and
Yeah.
you don't realize the world's out there. So I think I was very lucky to know from an early age the world was out there. But at the same time, it was just common teenager problems. I just wanted to be around more boys. I wanted to be able to, go to bars when I turned 19. I wanted to be able to, travel and not have to drive 5 hours to an airport. Just
Yeah.
those simple kinds of things. So that was kind of the really big desire to leave, to answer your question.
Oh, I have so much to ask. Do you think traveling back and forth all the time at a really young age and going to different schools affected you long term?
Oh my God, yeah. Like I've been in therapy now for 5 years, just really dealing with this like n- no sense of roots, no sense of stability. And even in the last 2, 3 years since starting moratorium children and trying to literally sow roots in my community, like I still feel such a sometimes a disconnection from the place I grew up because I look around at all the people I went to high school with, and we're nowhere near on the same wave as we ever were before. I'm completely in one direction, they're completely in another. Everybody's, I mean, we're only 27, but everybody's has a mortgage, has babies, and is married or talking about getting married, and
On their
that's it.
second marriage.
Yeah, on their second marriage, sleeping with someone's, best friend's wife, whatever. Best friend's wife's first cousin twice
Yeah.
removed. But
Who lives next door?
her lives next door, probably in the basement apartment. But it's either
I feel like only
terrible,
you and
terrible
I find
to
this funny.
I know other people are listening like, where are they from?
Yeah.
Where?
I think we
Where?
we have such a like it pulls on our heartstrings to remember like where we come from. And
Yeah.
like tell me if you feel the same way. Like I feel so disconnected sometimes when I go home in two parts. Yes, I feel different. I feel like my experiences are so different. However, going home still feels like home, and it gives me a lot of gratitude to know, like, this is kinda where I came from. This girl is still deep in me, and the reason why I can
Mhm.
succeed in the places that I am now is because of that upbringing.
Yeah, totally. See, I feel like you're gonna agree, but I felt very suppressed growing up in Newfoundland. Like my true self was very suppressed because from day one of me going back home, like that first April, however old I was, maybe like 4 or 5 years old, to when I moved home when I was 10, like I was always the outsider. I was always the weird one. I was always like, you sound like an Albertan. Right. It was always like I was always so strange. I was like I had different interests and was really into like different kinds of literature and art and things as an early age, really into different kinds of films. And I had no common ground with anybody ever growing up. It was really hard to find. But the one thing I felt now when I go back home, it's not more so about, the friendships anymore. I found it's like connected to nature that I've developed that I never had as a kid, that I never
Interesting.
saw. Yeah, I never saw it as a kid. And now when there's one little spot up on the cliffs in Conch that I always go and I sit and write and I'll meditate and just bring some tea and I might hang out there like 3 or 4 hours some days and just, overlooking the ocean and the island in the distance. And you're just on the edge of the freaking world. And
Literally.
yeah, and just sitting there, like, that's the biggest sense of home that I feel, and
Mhm.
it's almost like I didn't experience that or just relish in it the same way as I do as an adult, so it was almost like coming home again when I came back from Melbourne a couple of years ago, which was really nice, so it's in the past 2 years being home, it's been redefining what home is. But yeah, my upbringing was really stressful. I didn't realize it until I got older. I studied a co-op program in university. So we would be in school for 4 months and then we'd work for 4 months and be in school for 4 months and work. And then that often saw me, you know, living in one town and having to move and get a new apartment and then moving it every 4 months. And to me, that felt so comfortable to the point when after university, I got in a 9 to 5 job and suffered my first big episode of depression. And I had no idea why. I was like, I did all the things, I got this like decent high paying job. I got, all these great perks and I got and living with my best friend in this nice apartment in Halifax. Like, why am I unhappy? And then with that Christmas, I remember we went on a backpacking trip to Panama and I was like overlooking these beautiful like coffee hills and mountains and just sitting in the bliss. I remember like listening to my favorite band and just sitting in those hills and like starting to cry because I was like, I don't want to go back to Halifax. Like, if there's something wrong with me, I was like, no, like I'm just not happy. I'm not happy being in the one place. So it's taken me a couple of years to actually, now I'm just craving being in one place. I'm just trying to still piece together where that's going to be forever. And in my heart, really, I just see myself between Conch and Melbourne. Conch in the summers, run the business, back to Melbourne in the fall of the year as summer starts down there. So that's sort of where it feels right now. But I mean, that could change in 5 years' time, 2 years' time, 1 year time, who knows? But yeah, it's definitely affected me big time.
What drew you into moving to Australia? How
Um,
long were you thinking about that until you made the move? Because once you go to Australia, you don't come home very often. You didn't for 2 years, right?
no, and I probably like my visa ending was really just my push to start my own business. I always had this in my head probably since I was like 19 to start a business back
Mhm.
home. I just honestly didn't believe in myself at all. I didn't even believe it was a possibility for me because where I grew up, it's not a possibility. You don't see
Unheard of.
young people. Yeah, it's totally unheard of to see young people starting businesses. You don't have the resources, you don't have the capital, you don't have the mentorship, you don't have anything. So it was not even, an option presented to me. Back home, you are going to university to be a nurse or a social worker, or you're following some direct, very linear path of you're doing this to become this, and that's it. You get your good job,
Get your
and that's it.
mortgage, get your
Get your
kids,
mortgage, good job. Exactly. Get it all.
your retirement plan.
Get your pension. Yeah. And then retire around the bay. But I was doing the 9 to 5 thing. And I was like, this is miserable. So it was really,
What about it though
I
was miserable when you look back?
um,
Because there's
it
so
just
many
wasn't
people
for
that
me.
like they need that. Like that's the structure they
Yeah.
need. But
I
what
don't
was it
know.
about it?
I wasn't fulfilled. I think that at the end of the day, I just wasn't, yeah, I wasn't doing something that made my heart sing, as cheesy as that sounds. And in the back of my head, there's always been this knocking ever since high school. In high school, I was super into politics and, attended youth parliament and used to write out like a politics column for the newspaper back
That's so
home. Like I was
cool.
very, very into like doing something for Newfoundland. And I think that's what was missing. There was always this knocking in my head of like, when are you going to make a difference or try to do something? Because I always felt so passionate, but I didn't really know how to translate that into anything. I did as I got older, I kind of, as most people do, you become a bit cynical, lose trust in the government, lose trust in politicians that they're the ones who are going to make everything right. And so
Lose trust
politics
in there ever
and
being you being
society.
able to get to your dreams.
Yeah. So the kind of politics dreams died really fast. Then I started studying business and even throughout my degree, I didn't realize I could start a business. I studied a business
Me
degree,
either.
but never was like, maybe I could start my own business. That never dawned on me
Well,
at
I
all
feel
that
like
that
our
was something I
commerce
could do.
program was conditioning us to go work for someone else. I don't remember
Oh,
anyone ever talking
totally,
about starting your
totally.
own business.
I know, 100%. And then it was what I always tell people is the commerce program that we took was primed you to be a corporate employee.
Yeah.
That's
Go
what
into
it did.
consulting, go into banking, go be a high
Yeah.
exec marketer.
Yeah. That's all it was. And I was like, well, this doesn't feel
I know, but
right.
I didn't resonate with any of it.
Yeah. So I worked in sales the first year I was done university. And like I said, like went to this like very deep depression, realized something wasn't right. Had taken that trip to Panama and was like, okay, like this feels more like, maybe I'm supposed to travel or just go somewhere. I was really just in a desperate situation, to be honest. That's when I started going to therapy and was just kind of starting to get into meditation, things like that. And I had a really, really close friend from university who was in Australia and just finishing up a working holiday visa. And he was, talking about how great the wages were and how beautiful the weather was and how amazing the food was and the people were great. And he's like, why don't you could just come down here for a year and try it? Like, he was like, this is how much the visa is. This is what you need to do to get here. Like, pretty simple, straightforward. Like, you'll have no trouble getting a job. Why don't you just try it out for a year? And I pretty much with that, I was like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, I just need to get the hell out of Halifax. I need to
You
get
were
the hell
like,
out
give
of
me any
Canada.
option, like, and I'll jump at it.
Yeah,
Tell me what I have
pretty
to
much.
pay and I'll be there.
Yeah. So it was actually, it was very creepy. It was almost like fate. So that year
Mm,
I had planned to quit. So that was, I came back in January, made that decision early February, and then applied for my working holiday visa in March and it got approved. And then I just got really excited to go. And I remember sitting one day in May with like my best work girlfriend. We were eating like a pathetic sub at Quiznos. I say that because it's so funny because now with food, like from my experience in Australia, like I don't know, I relish in having a nice meal for every single meal now. Like I think those little things make such a difference how you feel in each moment. Just actually choosing something that's going to make you happy versus,
agreed.
bigger pictures in this shit job and hated it. But so yeah, I was sitting down with her eating this pathetic stuff that I hated. And I remember just saying to her, I was like, Mila, like I just want to quit and waitress for the summer. Like I don't think I can do this till September. That's when I plan to leave. She was like, you wouldn't do that, would you? She's like this really sweet woman from Cape Breton. She's like, you wouldn't do that.
And you're
And
like,
I
you
was
don't
like,
know me.
honestly, at the time, I was like kind of in that stuck of like, well, like have a good job, it's paying the bills. Like, why
Especially if
would
you need a bunch
I?
of money to save to go to another country.
Exactly. So I was just kind of like, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. I probably wouldn't. But it's so funny. It's almost like the universe made the decision for me 10 minutes later and go back into the office. And my boss asked to see me in the boardroom. And I'm thinking like, what did I like? Some your spidey senses are tingling. Or I was like, what is going on? He calls me in and he was again one of the sweetest men I've ever met. Amazing boss. Me and him had just bonded and became really, really close. So there's tears in his eyes as he's saying it. And he said, without cause, we're gonna have to lay you off. Pretty much the company was making some layoffs and X, Y, and Z. After that, I could just kind of tuned out. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. So I'm there trying not to smile. 'Cause I could. And he's like, we have a severance pay for you. I was like, what? You're gonna give me to leave this thing? Oh my God.
You're like,
So I'm there really trying
universe.
not to smile. I'm trying not to smile. I'm like first like the biggest smile in my life. I'm like trying to be calm. I'm like, yeah, because he's almost in tears, this man. He's almost
He's
crying.
upset.
He's upset and I'm jumping for joy. And he's like, I hope this gets you where you need to go. And he slides the check across the table to me and I look and it's like the exact amount I needed to book my ticket. I booked that flight
Shut
the night before.
up.
Yeah, it was like something like almost like 1,500 bucks. And I calculated what it would be for me to get my ticket, get to Brisbane. I remember the number on the calculator the night before was like just around 1,400. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, all right. So I went home right away, went and got 2 bottles of my favorite wine at the time, which is this beautiful Lucy Coolman, it's Nova Scotian wine. Got 2 bottles of that, sat down. I was like, I don't know if I'm unemployed, but it's going to be okay. Like
Mm.
something just washed over me. I was like, I'm going to waitress for the summer. I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'm going to go to Australia. But then it gets even weirder. So at the end of the summer of waitressing on the waterfront in Halifax and just having the time of my life, my last like couple weeks working there. At this point, I kind of decided I was flying into Brisbane. Everything was kind of planned out. I had met this Australian couple, like waiting tables, and they were super, super nice. And, our sons and daughters own a bunch of restaurants and cafes in Melbourne. Like, if you need a job when you get there, you should definitely apply. Like, come and we'll take you out. We'll do this. We'll do that. And I was just kind of like, yeah, yeah, sure. Like you meet people all the time when you're waitressing and kind of in that travel mode. So I didn't really think a whole lot about it. Like, yeah, yeah, sure. And they're like, no, no, like take her down her information, look these places up on Instagram. Like when you get to Melbourne, just let us know. So I get to Australia. Me and my friend have like a nice 2 weeks where we cross paths. He leaves. I'm there alone. I'm in Melbourne. I'm settling. I'm like working at this crappy job I found, just CFI. And then again, it was just this moment of like desperation where I was like, Greg, like I got that guy's. I should reach out to that guy. Had his number, been in Melbourne for a few weeks and didn't even think that was going to happen. Didn't even take the chance. That's who I used to be. And I did. I called him up and we had breakfast at one place, we had lunch at another, then we went for coffee at another spot. He's like, okay, where do you want to work?
And this is
Um,
all his restaurants. He's like, now pick one.
yeah, it was all his sons
Oh
and
my
daughters'
goodness.
places. So they'd been in the business for like 40 years in Melbourne, own some of the most beautiful cafes. Even to this day, they've just opened another 2 locations, different spots. Like everything's family owned, everything's so fresh and delicious. And the most efficient people I've ever worked for in my life. Just amazing how they ran their small business, taught me so, so much. Became like family to me. And that's where I'm hoping to go back to come September. But I ended up working there for 2 years, ended up managing two of their restaurants. Yeah. And it was just incredible and had, the best send off from them. And everything kind of happens for a reason. And it quite a wild ride.
But it's funny to me. I came into this conversation reading kind of the information that you gave me. And when I hear these stories from you, sounds like all the pieces are falling together.
Sounds
Uh,
like
wha-
it. I mean, I'm
What's
I'm
what's
still
what's there to complain about? What's there to struggle about? And I'm saying that knowing the difference, but I'm saying that as someone's looking from the outside in. This small town Newfoundland girl is traveling all over the world, went to Halifax for university, lived in Australia for 2 years. Now she's living in Costa Rica. She's running her own business. She's living her best life. However, when I asked you some things about what to talk about today, you mentioned that you feel like depression and anxiety are huge indicators of bigger issues in your life. And looking from the outside in, I never would have thought that about you.
I'm trying not to hide it. That's something I really have been, and of course social media is such a filter, but even on social media I try to talk about it when I get the platform or the piece. And even right now, I'll happy to go into it more. But I think like life's not always perfect, of course. I think from the outside looking in, like, yeah, you have everything. But I mean, day to day, I've always struggled with like loneliness, a big part of me. And because of the lifestyle that I'm leading, and right now, not by choice, like I do want to, like I said, put some roots down in Melbourne and then spend my summers home running the business and, you know, potentially open a business in Melbourne. That's kind of the goal right now. But a lifestyle like this, like with the instability, it doesn't really allow much room for, deep relationships. That's something I struggle with a lot. I found like when I first started traveling, I didn't have that fear that someone was going to leave or that I was going to leave. And just, you give your love to somebody in such a big way. And then it just all kind of gets ripped away just because you're all leading these like transient lifestyles. So now I just find I'm so much more guarded, which brings about like a lot of loneliness and a lot of anxiety and a lot of worthiness issues. Like, will I ever find love or will I ever be worthy of being loved? Because I don't even know where I'm going to be or I don't even know what I'm doing really. You're just like, you're going through the fog. You're like on a snowmobile, just going through the fog, just hoping you don't end up in a brook. You're just, you're just driving along. But, I grew up as well. Like I said, my parents were very young. They were in a very terrible relationship. There wasn't much love around me growing up. So I've never been modeled that. So I think a lot of what I deal with comes back to that piece, and which is what I'm kind of struggling with and working on. But I definitely think being an entrepreneur, it's a lonely road. It's a really, really lonely
Very
road. And when you meet people who happen to be in your proximity who are on a similar path, those are the people you need to hold on to for dear life because
100% because they get it.
they get it. The universe kind of gives you what you need. I totally believe that. I spent like a year and a half completely alone at home. And everybody was alone during COVID, but being alone in like northeastern Newfoundland in a remote peninsula with no service, with nobody your age, between the ages of like 20 and 40, nobody being like the only person there. That's, I think, as almost alone as you could be unless you were in solitary confinement.
I mean,
But then
similar.
this year, I had met two friends who moved home, like, had both spent 15 years in San Diego. And then realize, their father's from Conch and they just moved home to start a business together, two brothers. So,
Wow.
made two best friends. And I always tell them, I'm like, I'm so grateful you guys came into my life. But I think it's the waiting and the sitting around and like when you are alone and, you have all these visions and like nobody really understands you and your family doesn't understand you. I find I'm at a point in my life where even the friends I had in university, I'm growing apart from because they're all in Toronto working or they're all in Vancouver working and even no one's on this path. So it's sort of like that. I feel like there's been a lot of involvement in a very short period of time, and that is very isolating. So,
Well, I'll be the first one to tell you that you're not missing out on anything. So don't worry. Don't worry. If you
but you
ever
make
need
it look so
reassurance on
nice.
that, he'll be the first one to remind you it's not all it's cracked up to be. Trust me. I look at your life with envy. Like what you're doing is what I want. But I mean, it's easier to
The
say
grass is
that.
always greener. Yeah,
It
the grass is
is.
always
Yeah.
greener, and that's what I'm learning. Like, even just being here in Costa Rica the first couple of weeks, it was like very surreal because your problems still follow you wherever you go. I thought moving to Australia, it was like new life, new me, new whatever. I got down there, I got in a relationship pretty fast, and all of these issues started to come up. All of this anxiety and like trauma that I had passed from being a kid had just finally bubbled up. And I'm thinking, like, what was those 4 years of university? It couldn't come out then. Why is it coming out now?
I know. Well, we're too
Um,
busy.
you're too busy and you're too involved and you don't actually allow the space to figure out what's going on beneath the surface. So yeah, it's been a long journey. Like there's still some big goals I have I want to achieve and things I want to do. And even like defining self, I find like that changes all the time. You're like, okay, well, am I a business owner? Am I a writer? Can I be both? And it's like, but can I be both? Can I do everything I want to do? And who am I going to be? And, all that stress still exists. I think everybody deals with those problems. I think life through the filter is, you look at people's lives on Instagram. I look at your life on Instagram and I'm like, wow, like what would life been like for me if I was, working in Toronto and doing well and living that life? I'm like, well, you know what? I'm exactly where I need to be right now. So that's what I try to focus on as much as possible. I know it's really hard, and anybody listening, it's really hard to kind of look around your life and realize it's not where you want to be. But at the same time, the moment you're in is all the perspective you need to make a change.
I find you and I are similar where whatever we set our mind to, we could succeed at. It doesn't matter what the career path is. We could have did any traditional school path and we would have been successful in those careers. But I agree. I'm always like you where I could go down all of these paths, but which one do I choose? So how do you know which one to choose and which one feels the most right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's so hard. I think like there is this extra pressure of expectation too, especially when you're in your early 20s. If you grew up a bit of like an overachiever and excelling in everything, and like I said, being involved in all these conferences and doing this and that, and it's like the world is really your oyster at that age. But then it's like pressure of deciding and the pressure of if I choose the wrong path, oh my God, like what's going to happen to this dream or like that dream when you have not a singular focus. And I don't have singular focus at all. Like this past year, what I've been really struggling with has, for years, for about 5 to 6 years, my dream was to open my dream business was to open moratorium children. And, I ran it for the first 2 year with the first year alone. The second year had an amazing team, which was so great. And now, the third year, we're looking into expanding the experience. We're really focusing on what the core of the business is, which actually is providing grants and mentorship and creating a bit more of a outport economy to these places in Newfoundland. So there aren't any moratorium children who are going to suffer the effect of not being able to realize their dreams or not being able to give back to their communities. So that's something we're working on, which is super exciting. But even in all that, I think the big dream for so long was to open the business. And then the business was open and it was like, okay, now what? Like you're constantly having to evolve and you're constantly having to redefine yourself. And like that's life, but I feel like it's something I just learned in the last year. And like this is part of the ride. This is part of the process. Okay. Only 27, but I feel like, yeah, every month I learn so much. And sometimes it's like, is there a pause button? Can I just not learn? Can I not have any
Seriously.
lesson coming at me? Can I just lay on this beach and drink Corona and like forget about all my problems for a little bit, please? And
The moment you sit down and drink that Corona is when you're remembering or you get time to think about all your problems.
exactly. A good time to think, or, I am really happy where I am right now. I felt like it's giving me a lot of a dream again. And I felt like COVID for everybody, myself included. I felt like it was almost like this big fog that we were all in. Felt like there was no way out or we couldn't see the way out. And I feel like that suppressed a lot of creative people and a lot of dreamers and visionaries and whatnot. So it felt like everything got erased on the whiteboard all of a
Yeah.
sudden, which was kind of nice. I think it was, for a lot of people,
You come out with a
it
clean
was
slate again.
exactly. It feels like everything got shook up for a little bit and shaken down. And, it was very tragic for a lot of people in the world. But I think there is a silver lining for some people as well. And I think I found that those 2 years I spent at home, being around my family again, and like them actually getting to know me as an adult because I left when I was 17. And
Girl, I feel that. And the most I've ever been home since I left 10 years ago was that first summer after first year. That's the most I've ever been home.
wow.
And other than that, it's 5 days here, 7 days there. That's it.
Yeah. Same with me. I mean, I would go home for Christmas and
That was it.
Christmas in Newfoundland, for anyone who doesn't know, is pretty much just nonstop partying and drinking with your high school friends
Yep.
and family, which is not actually connecting at
Nope.
all. No. So I found this year, these 2 years being home, something else that's really been, I guess, heavy for me is that I've kind of said goodbye or gracefully parted ways with a couple of people who have been in my life for the last 20 years who have been, what I thought were really close friends, but there just comes a point when you're not walking that same path anymore. And it's almost damaging to be
Mhm.
so tied to each other. So that's also really, really difficult. People who kind of define your whole life in a way, all of a sudden, like you have nothing to talk about, or
Yep.
it's stressful for them to see you, or, they think you're too crazy, or their idea of a good time and yours are very different. But, they've been home raising kids for the last 5 years
Yeah.
and you've been running around the world like a crazy person having the time of your life. So it's very
Crazy by their
definitions start to
standards.
change. Yeah, crazy by their standards, and then like super normal and probably boring to some other people. So,
Exactly. But
so yeah,
how do you manage to sever those friendships when you're in a small town? You're gonna see them again. You're gonna they're still around, but you're not as connected
yeah.
anymore.
Nobody I grew up with lives in my hometown of Pumpkin anymore, which is nice. But at the same time, their cousins are there, their family's there, or like somebody's like the spirit of them still feels like they're there. And
Mhm.
because, they were such a main character in your whole adolescence and whole childhood, it's like very strange not to be for them to be in the story anymore. So that's something I'm still dealing with. And again, I feel what's something else I'm working on is like I feel like I have the luxury of being able to run away from my problem a lot.
I was gonna ask you
Um,
about that.
yeah, working online for the rest of the year and then just home for a few months in the summer as the anchor. I do have the luxury in September to opt out. And, if this is not where I want to be, I don't have to be here. Again, that took me 2 or 3 years to get to this point, like 2 or 3 years of a lot of like crying and stressing and wondering how the hell did people work online? How is this even real? Am I doing this right? Do I like what I'm doing? I've probably changed like online careers probably 5 times in the
I know you
last
have.
2 years. I was consulting, I was doing business coaching, I was doing like kind of
Good
into more like
strategy.
yeah, more like into wellness stuff for a little bit. And then I got into I got into copywriting just this past March, and it's just easy to me. I like writing and think I'm pretty good at it. So it just kind of
Girl, I'm
naturally
looking
and
for a
easy.
copywriter right now.
Well, look at
Yeah, we'll chat about this later. I'm like desperate for one, and I know you're good at it. So this is good to know.
yeah.
And do you
It's
find like that's what you're sticking to right now?
I mean, the eventual goal will be that I won't need to, I won't really like, I want my full-time focus to be the business and con because it
Yeah.
needs to be. And so I'm really hoping this is the last year or even this is the last 6 months. I have to do this, which will be nice because right now, like, again, that's something else that causes a lot of anxiety for me is that I'm being pulled in two different directions. So, you realize all the dreams you have, but then you're in this situation where my attention needs to be on sales and marketing for my summer business right now, although it's only November, but then I need to eat. I need to pay bills. I need
I need
to
money
live.
today. Yeah.
I need money today to live my life. So, you're still doing crap you don't want to do. You're still writing for clients you don't want to write for just because it pays nice.
I feel you. I running real estate and running the podcast are two very different worlds. I'm very thankful that I actually do love both. I definitely don't do real estate thinking, oh, it just pays the bill. Like I love it. But then I also love doing this. So I often feel like I'm living a double life. And
Yeah.
when I'm doing this with you now, it's like this doesn't pay anything. It's like this hour or two or the 10 of I will spend this week could make a lot more money in real estate doing it, but it's like it's a nice passion on the side. Like not everything you do needs to make you money. And I think our generation is really caught up in that. Like no one knows how to
Yeah.
have hobbies anymore.
No, exactly.
Everything has to be a hustle.
Do you ever, when you dream about, because you're like myself, you kind of have two things on the go, two things that you love and are doing it. One might be more so for money. One might be more so for passion and heart. For me, I'm always trying to like, I know it's possible to combine the two, but I'm always like, I feel like I'm being pulled in different directions. How do you manage the like conflicts of interest or being pulled in different directions like that? And how do you create time and space in your schedule? I'd love to know because it's hard when like one's dollar signs and one's just like, oh, maybe eventually this will make me some money, or I know eventually this will, but it's like eventually not now. And
I
kid
set
got to
very
eat.
specific times for it. So, when I sent you the link to book in, there was only a couple days you could have picked from in the week. Like it wasn't
Mhm.
open every single day. So I do podcast on what I consider slower days of real estate. So it's usually Monday, Tuesday, whereas usually Wednesday to Saturday, nonstop. So it took me a while to figure out that schedule. I only just finished my first year in real estate. So over the year, I learned like, okay, a little bit slower in the beginning of the week. I do for real estate, I do a lot of like in office work, that kind of thing. So it gives me a time to let's do a recording, let's edit the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. But it takes you a little bit to figure out that schedule. But for me, the podcast, it gives me a reason to turn off real estate, but also gives me great conversation topics to talk with clients about where a lot of people look at real estate agents and think you're just some salesy person. All you care about is commission check. And it's my way of saying like, I'm a real person too. I have a life outside of me showing you this home. And the first thing people always say, is it a real estate podcast? And I'm like, no, not at all. And they're more interested. They realize I'm human, you know? The same way as if I told my clients I have kids and I can't do this showing right now. I actually have to take my daughter to dance practice. It gives that human connection. So it's like my way of saying I have to go record a podcast. I said it to a client recently. He was like, no, wait, you actually run a podcast? That's sick. He's like, I'm actually thinking about starting when I actually want to talk to you about that. There's another connection that's completely outside of real estate. So
That's
I don't
awesome.
know. I think it makes you into a well-rounded person.
Yeah, it makes you interesting as hell. You're not
Yeah.
just, you're not just doing the one thing and going home and crying with your cat every night. You have
Well, and I
a
mean,
very vibrant life.
so many people do that life and
Yeah.
you need a reason. It's something as simple as like back a couple years ago when we were in the office, as someone that's doing the 9 to 5, you need to make that fitness class right at 5:30. Have a reason to get the hell out of here. If you don't have anything planned and scheduled, you're never going to leave here and you're never going to shut it off. So you got to have a reason.
So true. So true. And that's something I see a lot of friends I went to university with struggling with big time is
They
that,
never know how to turn work off.
never know how to turn work off and like very, goal oriented around like the next promotion or, proving yourself to somebody. And for me, I think that's my biggest issue. Even now working with a couple clients that I work with, like some are more role based and some is more just contract based. But even in relationships where I'm the employee, like I really struggle with even being an employee. I'm the worst employee anyone will ever hire. I'm
Oh,
I'm a
you
shit
hate it.
employee, to be
That's why you like
honest.
waitressing. You're kind of running and doing your own thing.
Exactly. Running a restaurant is like where like I can't wait to open my own restaurant. Like that's, you're just chatting to people. You're giving people good food. I mean, at the end of the day, it's simplicity, I think is so key. And, I struggled a lot with my parents' opinion of that for a really long time. I was in Australia, and, I was waitressing for like 5, 6 months. And then I decided I didn't want to leave where I was, but I didn't want to just waitress. I wanted more responsibility and I wanted to manage the place.
I
Yeah.
think I've asked you this before. When
Yeah.
when someone asks your parents, "What's Toni doing in Australia?" Do you think they're
Oh, yeah.
embarrassed to say she's managing a restaurant or waitressing in Australia? There's a lot of
So that
shame around that coming from Newfoundland.
there is. Yeah. I think this is a great advice for anyone who ever wants to listen to it. But I think whatever you want, you gotta ask for it. Like you can't fucking just sit around and wait for an opportunity to come to you. There's this big, spiritual conscious talk right now around, the hustle lifestyle is not the way it's supposed to be. But at the same time, like, you're not going to get anything sitting on your ass and doing nothing. I just finished reading Matthew McConaughey's book, and he
Mm.
talks about putting all this energy and effort into trying to find acting gigs in Hollywood, and nothing was coming to him. And someone gave me advice, like, just leave, just go on a trip somewhere, just go do something fun and like go live your life. And he came back and from the, amazing trip, and all these things are coming his way. It's like a flow. If you're grasping something by the throat, it's nothing there's no flow happening. You got to kind of release it and let it go. Anyway, so yeah, so I was waitressing, had left, kind of traveled for a bit, I came back to Melbourne, knew there was so much to learn from the people I was working from, of how they were running their business so efficiently. And because I'd never seen anything like that in restaurants before. And I'd been a waitress since I was 14. So I really wanted to learn processes and systems more, and like, menu creation and kind of all the back end sort of stuff. Wanted to learn how to cook a little bit, wanted to learn more about coffee, wanted to actually immerse myself in it, but I didn't want to be getting paid what I was getting paid. And I didn't want to be a waitress, just
Mhm.
straight. Like I wanted to be a little bit something else. And I know it's silly, but like the title mattered to me at the end of the day. Like I wanted to say or just feel like I was contributing more at this place because I knew I could. So I went back, and I was dealing with that for a bit, kind of going back and forth. And the man I was dating at the time was straight up with me and was like, Tony, you have to tell them exactly what you want. And like, they're not going to say no. Like you're good at your job. Like if you want to, take more stress off them, they're not going to say no. I was like, well, maybe I'll do it. So I put on my fucking blazer.
It's always the blazer.
I put on the blazer and I go speak with the owner, and I was like, I'm going to manage the place. I want to be paid more. I want work these days. I want these days off. And he was like, yeah, yeah, well, okay, like, let's do it. And I was like, "Fuck, that was easy." Like,
That was easy.
all built up in your head, all anxiety and stress built up in your head. But yeah, so to get back to what your question was, which I kind of forgot now, so I went off
Your
on a
parents,
tangent.
what are they thinking?
Yeah. So this was the thing. I knew I was managing the place.
And
Everybody,
you felt like you just achieved something huge.
my God, I was over the moon. I couldn't believe that these like, beautiful Australian people with their beautiful restaurants and their beautiful life. And I felt so like, what is all this? Like,
Like, indebted. Is this a dream?
a ru- yeah, like growing up in a rural community with nothing, like growing up in like this like insidious fog of poverty and misery, your whole culture being ripped up and destroyed, and everything around you is like falling down essentially, to being thrown in a situation where I felt like something was like lighting up inside me. And I was like, this feels so good being here. This feels so nice. Like, I actually want to come into work. I love eating and drinking here. And I love giving people this delicious food. I love just being here. And this energy was fucking great. So I felt great about it. And then conversation with my mom about a few months later. And by this point, I was running the restaurant, kind of co-managing with one of the owners. It was amazing. And I was just in a really kind of happy place career wise. I was having a conversation with my mother about it, and she told me, she's like, yeah, somebody asked me what you were doing in Australia. And I told them that you're working in marketing.
Mm.
And I was like, excuse me, what the fuck? You did
You're
what?
like,
I was angry. Like
I would've been too.
it wasn't even like, screw you. It was like something went off inside me. That sent me into like a big spiral, like you said, of shame, of like, I'm disappointing my parents. Then I think that triggers all the existential shit you're already dealing with. Like I said, of like, am I where I'm supposed to be? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? I have all these paths. Like, my mother would say to me, look, you went and got your degree in marketing and you're not even working in marketing. Well, I was like,
I've never
I
heard
like
that.
literally, I felt like a fucking teapot, like ready to fucking just like screaming. Like that's what I felt like for so long, to the point that I just like stopped talking to my parents for a long time.
What's a long time?
Um, like years. We were not like, I
Really?
wouldn't
Like,
say we
most
were,
of your time in Australia?
yeah. I mean, the time zones definitely helped with avoiding them, because it was 12 hours like ahead. So worked out really well, or 16 hours ahead or something crazy. They separated my first year of university. So that, it was like, it wasn't like one phone call home to mom and dad. It was like, have to call mom, have to call dad. But it was, for a long time, me and my mother's relationship was really tortured because I felt like a disappointment. But until I started in Melbourne, started getting into like sound healing meditations, and like, I think just creating space for myself to just be, and just learning more through therapy I was in. I think I learned like her expectations of me are just projections of the way she feels about her life. And from her eyes, she had me when she was 16, 17 years old, and had to sacrifice and give up so much, and never got to experience anything. And here's her daughter fucking, just being a waitress in Australia when she could be anything. I've given her everything, right? I've given her everything. I've set her up for success, the best that I could. And this is what she's doing with it. So I started to understand it more. Didn't make me feel any better towards her. It made me understand, but it's still, I definitely kept my mother at an arm's length for a while. It wasn't until this year, actually, or yeah, like even moving home to start my business, like,
Well, listen, I
you
mean,
know,
you're home running your business. Where is she?
well, my mother moved out west.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
because I remember you
and,
telling me you were living at your
and
grandparents'?
yeah, I lived with my grandmother first when I moved home because, like I said, I'm from somewhere so small. There's nowhere to rent. There's nowhere to buy.
Mhm.
Didn't really have another option. But my mother, I remember I was in Melbourne and at this point, I was managing the restaurant I was at for a while. Loved it. Loved everybody I worked with. Had a great friend group. Everything was great. And just in the middle of all that, my best friend's mom passed away in Newfoundland.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just like she was sick for about a week or two and then she just died. And I've never felt pulled home more in my life. And at this point, it's not like I had savings. I was in like 23. Like I wasn't prepared for anything just the next day, just how I was
Literally.
getting
I
home,
feel that.
how I was going to get home on the tram. Like that was my biggest worry. And all of a sudden I was like, I have to go home. I had to be there. Like this is one of those moments when you had to be there for somebody. So got on a plane, flew home, and started kind of talking with some people about, pretty much trying to distract myself. And I was talking about coming home to start a business and had somebody offer to like partner with me and do it. And it just didn't feel right at the time. But being home in that moment and realizing that I had to come back and then realizing that I was coming back to with my parents. So my mother was there. And I remember another conversation we had where she told me, and like I go through depressive episodes probably once a year. And I think it's clinical.
You think
I've
it's a certain time of year every time?
Not really. I think it's triggered by different things. I actually went on antidepressants for the very first time in my life in December of last year. And I am very happy to say that I'm not on them anymore, which is really nice because I had a bit of an issue being on medication, but it was definitely a last resort. I definitely had gone the holistic route for a very long time to the point where it just went through something, it was just not really bad to the point that nothing else was working. So
Yeah, it's the
medication was
last
always my
resort.
last resort.
Yeah.
Always last resort. But even prior to this, I think that's why it was so triggering because I felt for a long time that my parents didn't understand depression or didn't understand my illness and did not understand my life at all because they never never experienced even a fraction of what I was experiencing. So we could not relate. But when I, you know, when I came home for that funeral and was home and it was, really cold in the middle of March and just so gorgeous, like, beautiful snow everywhere and the sunsets and sunrises, everything. And, home for a sad reason, but at the same time, just feeling like, fuck yeah, I'm going to come home and do this. Like so energized, so charged up. I was like, I'm going to, go back to Melbourne, work my ass off for 6, 7 months. I'm going to come home in the winter and I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do. Like, it's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to make it happen. It's going to happen somehow. I remember explaining this to my mother and she looked at me and asked me if I was bipolar. She
Oh
told
my
me that I,
god.
she told me that I often get really excited by these ideas and she thought that I was like being manic. And
So you
I,
can laugh at this now, but there's still
oh
a
my
part of you
God.
of thinking you are so ignorant right now.
Again, like I felt like a fucking teapot in that moment. I was about to like lose my mind. I was
There's
like, I'm
so many
here.
levels of mad right now.
So many levels. And I was like, I'm here telling you like something amazing that I'm going to do that I'm going to need emotional support for. Like, this is not going to be easy. I just want you to be supportive. Just asking you for once in my life to be supportive because my whole life I was, always very headstrong. Even the decision to go to Dalhousie instead of Memorial University, like
Mm.
I had full ride money, full fucking scholarship, wouldn't have to pay a
You're like, let me
dollar.
go get some student loans instead.
Yeah, my parents were like, "Well, we can't afford to send you to Dalhousie." I was like, "Well, I'm going.
Yeah.
I don't care how. I'm going." So we fought for months until that September came, and I went to Dalhousie. I was not going to Memorial. So this is the thing. It was like another one of these situations where it wasn't. I was told not to start a business, but there was definitely no support in like well, not from my mother anyway, and like, let me totally emotionally support you and 100% you can do it. Rah, 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 Tony. It was like, you're fucking crazy. What are you doing? Like,
And
what the
when
fuck are you doing?
you say
Go get
you've
a job with your
done
degree.
yeah. You say you've done 5 years of therapy, so now I'm sure you understand that what she's saying is nothing about how she actually feels about you. It's like her views on what's possible, it's not as big as your views of what's possible.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah.
She doesn't
It's just a
realize these
projection of,
opportunities are at her hands too.
yeah, it's just like a projection of her own reality. Right. And again, like maybe she wasn't in that happy of a spot in her life back then, which I don't think she was. And so I have no, like, love her to bits now, like, where we get along so great now, but it's interesting what happened at the time because me and my father were always quite it's not estranged, I don't like using that word, but we were always kind of at a distance ever since well, my parents had a very, messy split, and their whole relationship was very messy, but it was always as though we were not took mom's side, but it was we saw mom's side of it more, and we were influenced, and dad was always the villain in that storybook of growing up
Mm.
until my brother and I got a bit older, and we realized, "No, you're both just fucking crazy, and you're not supposed to be together." Like, we love them to bits. They're both awesome people, but it was like together, not awesome. Like, no. Like when they said
It's
they were
also they
separating,
had to
we were
become
so happy.
yeah, they had to become full adults way too early.
Way too early, like I look at my parents and I'm like, you guys just grew up really 10 years ago and I've been here for 27 years,
Yeah.
right?
Imagine having a
So,
10-year-old right now.
when they finally, yeah, like, no, no. I cannot be a mother yet. I'm trying to mother myself still. But it was interesting because me and my father had never really got along. Pretty much, I think, looking back, I think it's my mother had painted a certain picture of him. And I'm so close to my mother growing up. And I think that's kind of where the disconnect was. But it was interesting when I made the decision that I was going to, start my own business. I wasn't going to work for anybody else. And I was going to start my own business at home. Of all places in the world that are prosperous, home definitely was not viewed as one of those prosperous places. Still, there's a big stigma around that. But my father was so supportive. He was like, "You can do anything you put your mind to. Like, go for it." And I was so shocked and just so happy that somebody said that because I was like, "That's all I needed to hear." So even in the last I guess 6, 7 years since then, me and my father have become like we've like healed our relationship. We've become so close. He's living at home right now. My mother lives out west, but he's in conch, so he also gets to play like a very big role in the business. He's a really great carpenter. He constructed all of our furniture for our dinners and helps out everywhere he can anything from his skill set.
Makes
He
my heart so
um,
happy.
yeah, like the first winter I was home, let me set up office in his basement. Needed storage this summer. We store everything in my dad's basement. He's gives me his truck to run errands and do stuff. Like he's not a wealthy man, but he's very wealthy in what he gives. And he gives
Yeah.
as much as he can and he'll do what he can. And just like I said, having one person that's like, go for it, do it. And somebody who obviously you care about a lot. Your friends can all be around you and be like, yeah, go for it, do it. And that could be jack shit. Like that's the way it was for me. I had people around me be like, yeah, you can do it, Tony, you can do anything. You're so smart. Oh my God. But not having any approval from any of my parents, that fucked with me big time. It
And
really hurt.
it's interesting. I know you don't like to use the word estranged, but it's kind of what it is. Being estranged from your dad for so long, and then he ends up being your biggest cheerleader.
Yeah, it was quite ironic. But yeah, it's like other than that, I think that's another challenge of coming home is like it wasn't just coming home and starting a business. It was coming home and having to almost like rewrite all of that childhood trauma or like recreate the whole story or like understand everything as an adult and kind of dealing with that inner child as well, like letting her know that it's going to be okay, that like that's not who we are anymore. We're safe now, we're protected now. We don't need anybody else. We got this. That's a lot of stuff that I talk about when I do therapy because that's definitely what's been traumatic for me is all that. So it's been definitely a big like healing journey starting the business as well. And every year it's like another layer of the onion.
Of
Like
course. And the
this
onion
year
probably
was
keeps
like
growing.
oh my God, the onion's growing, but the
Take a
layers are
layer
like,
off, put a layer on.
I'm just crying my eyes out over the onion. But yeah, so this year it was like a big like transformation friendship wise. Like it was like stripping away those friendships that weren't serving me anymore that I thought like, or I think I did in the first year I was home. I needed somebody. I needed that connection. And then by
Totally.
year two, it was like, we don't align. This isn't working. I'm making you feel this way. You're making me feel this way. This isn't good. And
We have
then
nothing in
that's tearing
common
apart.
anymore, and that's okay.
Yeah, we have nothing in common. You think I'm crazy. I think you're boring. Like it's that's boring.
And this is not a thriving friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not serving either of us. Like always gonna love you, but I'll love you at a distance. And
Totally.
I'll see you at every summer, I'm sure, for some party when you decide to come home. And I'm
Mhm.
sure we'll have a beer. I'm sure we'll have a laugh and I'm sure it'll be fine. But, it's just as I get older, I realize the couple of people that you need to surround yourself with, like the network that you need to surround yourself with needs to move you forward. Not even keep you in the same place, like needs to actually be pushing you forward. The people around you need to be there. Like you need to be extremely conscious about who you let into your energy sphere and who you give your energy to, because it's a precious fucking resource. So precious. All your creative ideas, all your vision, all your potential, everything is stored in that energy. As soon as that starts getting leaky, as soon as you're, giving that to even right now, what I struggle with, doing little jobs here and there just to make money that I don't like that's an energy leak. I think that's maybe getting older, maybe because of the work that I'm into now, but definitely when it comes to like being more conscious about exactly what you're doing and being aware in the situation and trying to like zoom out of things and look at them from the outside instead of being so caught up in the middle of it all. It's helped me big time. So if anybody wanted a place to start with that, I think it's turn on a meditation. I don't know about these apps and stuff. I don't know. I'm just plug it in
Just
and close
quiet
your
your
eyes
mind,
and
finally.
yeah, just
Get
whatever it
rid of the
takes.
distractions.
Yeah, one of my best girlfriends who's here with me now, like for her, that's going for a run. For me, I can't run the length of myself. So going jumping in the ocean every night when the sun's going
100%.
down, like
You
that
feel
to me,
alive.
yeah, just laying down, letting the water fill my ears and just floating is when my mind gets quiet. For some people, that's a run. For some people, that's turning on their Headspace or Calm app. For some people that's smoking a joint and having a
Mhm.
glass of wine and watching Gossip Girl at the end of the night. Like whatever it is, just I think you just said something awesome about, structuring time in to get shit done that matters to you.
You have
Um,
to add it to a calendar or it's never gonna get
Add
done. The
that
same as
in.
working out.
Yeah. Yeah. Give yourself like a morning or give yourself a couple hours some afternoons to do that wherever you can. Because yeah, super important. Super important. Look at me trying to be all preacher
I
here,
mean,
but
it's not even trying, it's coming out naturally. You're wise beyond your years, trust me, and
oh,
that's why I gravitate towards you and admire you. I don't
oh,
just hang
thank
out with
you.
people that, don't have all this wisdom. Okay, I have a couple last questions before I let you go.
Sure.
Okay, my first question for you is, what's going on with this book? I didn't know you were writing a book. Tell me more.
So the book is called Love Letters from St. Hilda, and it's a collection of poetry that wrote that relationship that I talked about throughout that whole relate throughout my whole time in Australia. I was writing a lot of poetry. I usually find like when I'm going through anything anxious, or depressed, or even when I'm really happy, it's always just my outlet. It's always been my outlet. When I was young, I used to write like what I thought were songs. I used to sing them in my head and just think I was songwriting, which I was, I guess, but it was, poetry and still the same way I write now. I kind of sing it in my head, then I write it down. So yeah, it's a collection of poetry. It's like a traveling romance, but it's also coming of age. It's so applicable to anybody who's ever had a breakup in their life at all. Because heartbreak's so universal, love is so universal, but heartbreak is so universal and it cuts so deep. So it's a very raw, very emo, very there's definitely some beautiful light stuff in there towards like the end of it as things heal. But it's a collection of poetry. I have an amazing illustrator. Her name is Mia Music, who her and I have the best tale of how we met. We both were in love with the same guy in university. And
Why
he
do you
fucked.
always have so many of these people? You get caught up in love triangles.
Well, he was with me and then we ended and then he'd started dating her and then she was always like the other woman who I hated. I'd write
Of course.
songs about her and be
What?
like, fuck this girl. And then I met her and me and her hit it off and they had broken up. So we were both like, had this common heartbreak. We pretty
Yeah.
much bonded over that. And she is the illustrator of my book. So I'm very excited. Her work is amazing. So I'm very excited to blend some photography and her illustration and then the poetry together. We're hoping for an early 2022 release. It's just a little bit difficult creating a book when the illustrator and author are in two different countries, but we are going to make it work because something I've always wanted to do. And it's, yeah, high priority for me to get that out there in the world, but it'll be the first of many poetry books.
I
Of
believe
many.
it. Please let me know so I can get it myself. Last question for you, the most important one. To anyone that's listening right now, you've given us so much. So my question to you is, what can the audience give you today?
Oh my God, this is fun. I would love for everybody to follow Love Letters from St. Kilda and share it with your friends and share it with every woman you know, every man you know. I mean, it's very applicable to anybody who's ever been in love and then was not in love. So, yeah, some juicy things coming out there. And, if you're looking to completely detox and go to the beautiful place that I've been talking about all in the last hour, follow Moratorium Children, come see what we are doing in Conch. It's a 4-day restorative escape. Absolutely the most complete detox you can give your soul. Really, again, like rediscovering yourself, given space for that authentic self to come out and be seen and heard, and going to a part of the world that is raw and rugged and just being immersed in that really, really authentic culture. No touristy shit, I promise.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Toni, I had no idea what to expect from my chat. Today I knew it was gonna be good. I just didn't know which direction it was gonna go. And it's more than I honestly ever could have imagined. And I don't think you understand how much value you just gave everyone, because a lot of people listening are our age, going through the same shit that we're going through. And you're giving lots of wisdom into how to get through it. So thank you.
God, wow. Thank you for having me. I was looking forward to this so much. And we had some technical difficulties, many of them, me being in this country, this very hot, bug infested, beautiful country. Oh, but thank you for making it happen, Jenelle.
My pleasure, girly.